Scarpino. I am a lawyer. I teach at the University of Loppiano in Brazil. I became a PhD in law with another social communication for this Institute of Sophia with a research on the effects of fake news in democracy, especially in the Brazilian context with control tools. So we'll moderate this panel where we talk about regulations in the digital world, and to make this analysis we have chosen some realities within the digital universe, and we'll try to touch sensitive points that will be a stimulus to reflect how to make the digital world more healthy, and because we cannot tolerate that this is done, and on which governments should act. As a first speaker, we will listen to Sergio Barbaro, that I will introduce now. Are you there? Yes. Good morning, everyone. I will introduce Professor Sergio Barbaro. He's a lawyer, doctor of research in private law and new technologies at the University of Bari in Italy. He's a teacher of compared juridical system, and he teaches also Sevilla. He is a legal consultant in terms of legal property and advocacy of human rights. We have two questions for you: digital governance in the US and China. So I give the floor to you. So I will share my PowerPoint. In this way, it is easier for interpreters. The PowerPoint is in English, but I will speak in Italian. I hope you can see it. Okay, so when we talk about digital regulations in the US, we have to start from this normative text, which is a bit aged. The Communications Decency Act. This text shows the immunity of providers for contents created by other providers. It is called a safe harbor. There is a place where providers of online services are welcomed without that they can respond for the contents that can be inserted in the platforms. And it's because basically this Section 230 it is not given to publishers. In particular, Section 230 says that no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher speaker of an information provided by any other information content provider. So this principle in terms had consequences in other verdicts, in particular the Supreme Court that intervened with this very interesting case, Reno versus ACLU, where declared challenge the constitutionality of two provisions concerning the protection of minors, because they said that obscene or indecent content could not be posted on the network because they could create problems to the growth of development of minors. But these two principles of the dispositions that were provided within this text have been declared unconstitutional by the US judges because they limit the free speech, in particular in the opinion of this judge, John Paul Stephen, who clearly said that to this provision would be excessively limited to the freedom of expression of adults, because the concept of free speech is a concept that is the basis of the US legal order. Now, about cyberspace, it is considered as not invasive as the one of television, and there is a full freedom of expression, so no burden can be posed on adults in order to post contents in the cyberspace. So this is based on another verdict of 1919 of the US Supreme Court that developed this concept that is still has an influence of the marketplace of ideas. This concept that is says that common good is made in some way through the free circulation, not controlled of ideas on the market, free trade of ideas. This favors these ideas in the same market that self-regulates. So this principle that was developed outside of the network is also developed for the internet and is at the basis of the governance on digital law on digital in the US. So not only providers have an immunity from responsibility, but also they have a defensive barrier in front of any regulation concerning their activities. So this idea of the marketplace of ideas is the cornerstone of the US model of governance of new digital technologies. Another example that I will give you is the one of the privacy. In the US, there is no specific evolution of privacy as in Europe, but it is considered as a commodity, as a good that can be freely exchanged on the market. So data are an expression of the market, they're goods that have a market value. So individuals must be free to make circulate these goods within the network, within the social reality, without any imposition and any kind of preventive control. So there is only an ex post control. So when damage to the consumer is verified, because where asserted damages to consumers or unfair commercial practices, then indemnification is provided for. In China, the basic values are order and public stability. The internet and web are considered infrastructures as a part of a national strategic plan. So everything is seen on the basis of this strategic national approach. So the accent is on security rather than on protection and circulation. There are two directives. In summary, the first is security and stability, that is expressed in the control on private life of people, limit on speech and free access on the net. The second is to favor the private business activities so they can be competitive on the international market with only some guidelines, so freedom of enterprise and control on privacy. It's not by chance that China is one of the great repressors of fake news that are criminalized in the criminal code of China. So those who post fake news make a crime. But we have regulations also in artificial intelligence that are very soft, that are part of the soft law. They have the functions of giving indications to enterprises so as to make them free to compete on the market. So that is anti-monopolistic rule that we'll see in China. For the rest, it is a full development under the state control. Now we heard about this system that I inserted here of the treasure card. In China, the most important expression of social control through algorithm is this, which is a project that is still to be implemented on a national level. Those who can take part in this game of life and be evaluated by the state on the basis of their behavior, and this involves consequences on the social level both for awards and in terms of possible social punishments. So if you have behavior that are considered socially useful, you get a good score, otherwise we lose points. Like giving aid to the poor or visiting the sick parents is something good, or praise the governments on social media. What are the behaviors that are considered not socially valid? So citizens lose points if they spread rumors on the internet, they don't visit all the parents, they spend too much time on the internet, or they express insincere apologies for bad actions that have committed. So if you do well this game, you can be selected for important jobs or well qualified jobs. You have the opportunity to enter more easily into important schools, better schools, and having easy access to forms of loan or tax reduction. If you are not good, you're excluded from many human rights, from public transportation, or even ineligibility for certain jobs, etc. So this idea of the security and control on the private behavior on the other is very clear. Article 1 of cybersecurity law makes reference to this, to national security and societal public interest. Also about privacy, we have an example of what we say. The privacy was introduced after a serious case of data breach in China to this platform of third-party payment platform, Alipay. You know, where Chinese citizens were, this data were illegitimately acquired, data from Chinese citizens, and apparently this personal information protection law that was implemented that has deep differences to the European laws, especially in terms of data control. So the state controls this data so that they don't go abroad, because this would be a violation of the national security sovereignty. So guarantees of protection are very low for individuals, and instead they are very high to protect the state data concerning the state. There is a possibility to verify that this happens only under state control, while individuals do not have a great power to act and be protected against the violation of their data. So as a conclusion, we have another rule in which the key aspect is international data sovereignty, and to the detriment of the rights of individuals. And with this I conclude, and I thank you. Thank you, Professor Barbaro. So these are very different models that we should look with much attention. Now we'll listen to the reflections coming from a Latin American reality. Our invited members recorded something about the innovative agenda for agenda of communications and digital platforms in Latin America. And Martin Becerra is a doctor in science of information and professor and researcher in Argentina at the National University of Quilmes and National University of Buenos Aires. He is member of the National Council for Scientific and Technical Research, which is one of the most prestigious research centers in Latin America, and we'll watch this video. Martin Becerro will speak in Spanish.
Fa parte del Consiglio Nazionale per la
Ricerca. member of the National Center for Technical Research Center, which is one of the center research more prestigious in Latin America. Let's watch this video. Martin Becerra will speak, a Doctor of Science of Information. Good afternoon, good evening, di ricerca più prestigiosi. Good afternoon, good evening. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Martin Becerra. I'm a professor and researcher in Argentina at the National University of Quilmes, at the University of Buenos Aires, and at the National Council of Scientific and Technical Research, here called CONSET. I'm grateful for the invitation to participate in this meeting. I was asked to address one of the research topics that we are developing with the team I lead, which concerns the regulatory agenda of information and communication technologies and digital platforms in Latin America. Scientific and technical research.
Vorrei fare un prossimo intervento in cui per fare qualche sistemazione di questo video che è stato un po' di problema.
We should have a short break for. Okay, now we will continue with Senor Ateresi. I will present him. He will share the about the protection of data. Let's wait for a while. For a few minutes. There's some technical problem. Okay.
La parola,
The word.
a lei la parola quando...
For you. Hello. Forgive me, I have not heard you. You have given me the space, notwithstanding of the epoch of AI. There is still a digital divide in this city, like here in Belgium. Every now and down, I lose the Wi-Fi signal, so be patient. In the meantime, I begin. Now, I work for the protection of data and guarantee. The principal thing, we supervise the compliance of EU institutions with the applicable data protection law. Second, we advise the legislator, the European Commission, but also the European Parliament, when a law proposal is drafted that has an impact to the processing of personal data. Then, we host the Secretariat of the European Data Protection Board. The body is set by the General GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, to manage of the EU-wide data protection charges, and are part of it together with the data protection target of member states. My unit contributes with the technological expertise to legal assessment. Today, I would like to quickly make some considerations on the evolution of the EU digital policy, aiming at the protection of people's rights at European level, with some references to the role of self and co-regulation. Uh, look at the recent past to understand or contribute to the current debate. Traditionally, up until a few years ago, the only regulations at European Union level aim at regulating the digital for its effects on people's dignity and fundamental rights were personal data protection and privacy law. In particular, do you say that they are the same? No, not exactly. I will say in a while why. It's a bit technical. Bear with me. There is the old directives to the protection of individuals with regard to the processing of personal data on the free movement of such data. This was the first EU level data protection law whose basis in primary law is the Article 8 of the EU Charter of Fundamental Values, the right of the protection of personal data. The second is the Directive 2058 on privacy and electronic communications, the so-called e-privacy directive, based on particular to the Article 7 of the EU Charter of Fundamental Values, the right to respect for private and family life. On privacy and communication, I would like to stress the foundational role of all this of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU. If Article 2 is the right to life, Article 1 is the right to human dignity, and it states human dignity is inviolable. It must be respected and protected. All this becomes highly topical with the current evolution of digital and growing role of artificial intelligence. Now, Amazon and eBay were launched in the US exactly when the Data Protection Directive came into force. The directive already upheld a visionary approach to protect individuals, their data, and fundamental rights. The enforcement of the EU member states of both directives before the GDPR has been, I believe, rather weak and not sufficiently coordinated. This was due to some fragmentation among national laws and also cultural differences. But the main causes, in my view, have been the underestimation of the future role of the digital and its impact, and maybe a lack of political will to harness the foreign digital oligopolists. The development of services on the web, and in particular the rise of e-commerce and social networks, have pushed towards a new business model based on online advertising with the increased level of online tracking and profiling of users. Similarly, governments, security services, and law enforcement bodies have been more tempted by this growing potential for continuous surveillance of people through their online fingerprints. Maybe we all remember the Snowden revelation 10 years ago. Those facts started waking up our minds, making us realize that the internet had evolved quite, as the Dr. Massaro said, in quite differently from what its inventors, such as Tim Berners-Lee, had imagined it. If digital platforms and social networks had democratized certain communication opportunities and reduced social distances, their unregulated use and their concentration in the hands of few companies their concentration in the hands of few have produced the adverse and the side effects we all know on individual, society, and democracy. The GDPR has been a revolutionary step towards a new digital culture in the EU and has influenced the evolution of digital revolution in the entire world. The effective enforcement of the, it is everybody does know the fine that has been hurled against Meta for GDPR infringement in Facebook. One of the reasons, this is the focus, one of the reasons for the GDPR is to see its light was the failure of mainstream digital service providers to self-regulate. The Data Protection Directive already contained the Article 27, which encouraged the design and use of codes of conduct. We saw a few attempts in this direction, in particular for cloud services and gas and electricity smart meters and grids, but no meaningful effort by mainstream online platforms and service providers. Additionally, provision and management of telecommunications, production and distribution of gas and energy, for example, have been heavily regulated, and this started to be reflected also for their impact on fundamental rights, such as, but it did not happen in the for those who are providing us the online service. This was the case of the online service providers. Despite the dominant role of online tracking and profiling in the digital economy business model, no meaningful self-regulation initiative took place, and attempts for standards such as the Do Not Track have failed. Things have This have started changing with the advent of the GDPR, though. This GDPR has seen the co-regulation with the central regulation of self-regulation and the code of conduct. Naturally, this co-regulation or criteria are strictly defined by the law and the competent authorities who ultimately have also the power to revoke certification and code of conduct. Ultimately, we have recently witnessed the exponential rise of artificial intelligence and its implementation. Many have started realizing how the integrity of the whole lives of human dignity are in danger and how urgent it is to refer to common ethical rules. For example, the GDPS Giovanni Bottarelli created in 2016 an ethics advisory group composed of prominent academics and professionals. Now, in the last years, the union has reg- Precision. The last few years has finally realized that ensuring innovation for the well-being of citizens while upholding its founding values can only be ensured by holistic approach. This includes both the use of multiple instruments of different legal nature, including data protection, consumer and competition law, and also mix of regulation, co-regulation, and self-regulation. Hence, the famous digital package. The digital package is a collection of law proposals, and now it would be too long to go in depth in this. If we take, for example, the Digital Service Act and Digital Markets Act, their aim, as stated by the EU Commission, is to create safer digital space where the fundamental rights of users are protected and to establish level playing field for businesses. Uh, these are quite complex pieces of law with implementation challenges. They are structured with mandatory rules accompanied by enforcement provisions, including important fines. It will be quite exciting to follow their implementation, whether, or most probably, it will be quite exciting to follow their implementation and whether, or most probably when, they will need to be adopted in the future. Because we know that certain things take time. At the same time, the EU is trying to boost innovation by sourcing value from the data with the so-called data spaces. Here it is also very important to strike the right balance between the common good, as like in the healthcare, and the possible misuse, in particular of personal data against human values and dignity. The AA Act, I would not mention it since the Honorable Benifei will speak about it. I would just say that the as- the privileged space for battle is the following. Now, this happens when the union has seen there has been the Declaration on Digital Rights and Principles. Von der Leyen, President of the EU Commission, stated, the signature of the European Declaration on Digital Rights and Principles reflects our shared goal of a digital transformation that puts people first. As we can see, there are exciting times in front of us where we need to contribute to choose the world we need to live in. This implies taking clear and courageous decisions. The, this, we need the solutions to the problems that we exist, not to the problems that do not exist yet, but create ulterior problems. Therefore, it needs some courageous and clear decisions. The law in this context is a fundamental role. I believe, though, that self-regulation initiatives such as the digital oath can play the essential role to substantiate the law and to go beyond it. Uh, at the service of a vision of life and society which wholeheartedly I share and work for. Thank you. Thank you for the excellent reflection, Massimo Torresi, who has just spoken. The guarantee of protection of data, European Data Protection Supervisor. Thank you for the complex but dynamic presentation. Now we can listen back to the video, or let's continue to the next intervention. Let's try the video then.
University of Quilmes, at the University of Buenos Aires, and at the National Council of Scientific and Technical Research, here called CONICET. I'm grateful to the invitation to participate in this meeting. I was asked to address one of the research topics that we are developing with the team I lead, which concerns the regulatory agenda on information and communication technologies and digital platforms in Latin America. In this regard, I'd like to begin by pointing out that after more than 2 decades of relative regulatory looseness and relaxation in the development of public policies on the Internet, on large technology companies, the big tech, both in the Western powers, Europe, the US and Canada, and also in China. Today we are witnessing a change, and to a large extent this change is caused by scandals and abuses of dominant position, both in the advertising market, such as abuses in managing the personal data of users of large digital platforms, as well as the revelation of cases of mega espionage by governments of world powers using private corporate platforms. Well, the governments of the great powers began to take stock of this crisis that the digital ecosystem has suffered in recent years, and to produce policy and regulation of different types, but of different kinds, but not always harmonized among themselves. in reference to the digital ecosystem. In this regard, we could organize this policy and regulatory production into three main groups. On the one hand, there are three major sets that refer to three major issues that characterize the behavior and performance of the digital ecosystem today. On the other hand, we have the set referring to the protection of personal data of billions of people, users of digital platforms, services and applications. We can see that, for example, in Europe, there has been progress in this area with the regulation of personal data protection. And there are states within the United States, such as California, which have recent, very strict and very relevant regulations on this point, which is a crucial point, as we know, of the functioning of digital economy. In fact, this economy is based on the extraction, processing, distribution, and above all, commercialization of personal data. Since it commoditizes this data processing, without asking for consent, and in many cases, without the informed consent of the owners of those data. That is, the individuals who give them up in their digital footprint when operating information and communication technologies. A second set refers to the contents that, of course, circulate in the networks and that put in tension, in many cases, the right of freedom of expression, on the one hand, with other rights, such as the right to non-discrimination or the right not to disseminate contents that are harmful to physical or mental health. They also come into tension with the proliferation of hate speeches that directly incite to commit violent acts against individuals or groups of people. In addition, they come into tension with disinformation operations that are technologically recycled, although, of course, this is not new in the history of politics and human interaction. There is a third set that has to do with economic competition, the rights to avoid abuse of dominant position in the markets, but also the rights of users and consumers. Not in all countries do legal regulations put users and consumers on an equal footing. I live in a country, Argentina, where we have a consumer protection law, a consumer defense law, which is not a recent law, but it is nevertheless appropriate for digital services because it does not require a client-consumer relationship where the user pays for a service to become a consumer. In the Argentine law, the fact, for example, of using a service and giving personal data as consideration configures the recognition of rights on the part of those users. So we have these three big sets. We see that some European standards, for example, the DSA, the Digital Services Directive, or the Digital Markets Directive, the DMA, adopted last year in 2022, account for some of the big problems that we can recognize in these sets that I just mentioned. But in Latin America, the situation is very different because the attention of governments, let's say the Latin American digital agenda, has been basically focused on another priority, which is the deficient access of a large part of the population to technologies, devices, and network connections. Connectivity in Latin America reflects an unfortunate and historical fact, i.e. that this continent is the most unequal region on the planet, where the gap between the rich groups and the poor sectors of the population is greater. This socioeconomic gap is reflected in turn, of course, in the digital divide, which has socioeconomic reasons, but also reasons related to gender. They have reasons that are in connections with the geographic location of people and localities, or with age. In Latin America, this is a priority because many social sectors either do not have access to physical and mobile network devices and connections, or if they do have access, very often they do so under very poor conditions. That is, that their ability to pay for consumption is limited according to the income of the different social sectors. As a result, lower income social sectors are less likely to load credit on their mobile devices, for example, to navigate or take advantage of the potential of technologies in terms of labor contacts, with negative effects in terms of access to information, cultural goods and services, as well as entertainment resources. So this problem is the focus of most Latin American governments. Of course, I'm generalizing because there are exceptions. Brazil is an exception to what I'm pointing out. For example, in these days, the Brazilian Congress is discussing an ambitious bill that aims to regulate digital platforms, especially to prevent the abuses of large digital platforms. Also in terms of contents, they remove profiles or reduce the visibility of certain contents with decisions that are opaque and cannot be appealed by users, who are also changeable. In other words, it is a rather Kafkaesque universe, where the variability depends on the decision of the company's top management, and there is no democratic procedure to prevent this arbitrariness. Therefore, the Brazilian Congress is an exception to the trend that I'm describing in Latin America. There are basically, although not exclusively, two reasons why this agenda is lagging behind in Latin America. On the one hand, the fact that the speed and the magnitude of the technological changes brought about by large companies that own socio-digital networks and digital platforms far exceeds the deliberative times of a democratic consultative procedure that builds a consensus. This consensus can then be built with legal norms in a region that, I insist, has the structural deficiencies of the Americas. And there is a second reason that has to do with the inertia, the package dependency of the different Latin American countries when it comes to limiting or attenuating the effects of the hyper-concentration of the communications market in Latin America. Unlike what happens in Europe and in the US, in Latin America, abuse of dominant position in the traditional telecommunication sectors and in the traditional media, whether in the print or audiovisual industry, is the rule. This abuse has been the rule in Latin America, the region of the world with the highest levels of private concentration of ownership, and there are no public service media or corporations to counterbalance this hyper-commercial presence of communications with few but strong corporations. So that I repeat, Latin America is lagging behind on this issue on two fronts. Such delays related to their socio-economic conditions, to their agenda, and to the impossibility to keep up with the dizzying race of production of technologies, applications, and technological services. And on the other hand, a lack of regulatory dynamics in the production of public policies aimed at protecting the public interest to the detriment of corporate abuses by large companies, that in this case also affects the whole digital ecosystem. Well, I'm very especially active on Twitter and other socio-digital networks, so with great pleasure. Unfortunately, I cannot be present with you now, but I remain at your disposal. And the digital ecosystem also gives us the possibility for comments, consultations, and exchanges. Thank you very much.
Grazie professore Becerra. Adesso
Thank you, Professor Becerra. And now I give the floor to Maddalena Maltese. We'll talk about the Global Digital Compact. Maddalena Maltese is a correspondent from New York for Radio Core, Sole 24 Ore, agency of finance where she collaborates with several media in Italy and the US. She is a representative for NGO New Humanity, multi-faith advisor at the UN, and I give her the floor to face the topic artificial intelligence and the regulation of the digital service. Good morning. This is about 6:20 in the morning. Thank you for the invitation and above all for this initiative, which speaks of commitment on the cure of care of humanity. The principal themes that at ONU we are getting ourselves busy with. I will share to you something of how we are living this new approach to the global digital. Last December, together with the East West Coast of the US, we have met the president of Microsoft, the leadership of technology, of AI, was at the center of our debate, of our questions. As you can imagine, in 2023, we have had results that his own team should thought they would have achieved only in 2023. So you can imagine with 10 years of anticipation. Last week, his tone was different. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, he asked for regulation. He asked for a register where the names of companies that used AI were present and how this, the same tones, if not even more apocalyptic, were used by the founder of ChatGPT, Sam Altman, frightened by the results of the technology that he himself created, and gathered other scholars and engineers to sign a letter urging legislators to act to prevent the extinction of the human race. Yesterday, the EU and the United States announced that they will work on a common and voluntary code of conduct on artificial intelligence. This is an urgent need for regulation. But and the question is that UN is asking is which kind of regulation? Who should regulate? Are we certain that once the rule has been drafted and the law voted, this will be sufficient to encompass all the complexity of the digital world? This constant challenge. They are not against legislation, naturally, but this is to put in front of you the question they are making in a heightened manner. I would like to present to you three avenues for reflections. The digital compact. It is a frame, in a certain sense, of not of regulation, but of principles which should govern the regulation of each state. These three uh, avenues of reflections are data, typology of government, and the commitment of the UN. The data, around 5.6 billion people worldwide use the internet, yet 71% of the world's countries do not have digital legislation. Microsoft has already invested 3 billion in AI and is preparing to invest another 10 billion. On on the medical front, the US Drug Agency last year approved 210 algorithms that are used for the data, DNA, and protein analysis to develop treatment systems and drug production. These numbers tell us the extent of investments. The this shows the amount of investments of the power of big tech and at the same time the slowness of the laws in the face of speed technology. When legislation is invoked, in the second point, so many we have governments in the world and so many approaches to regulation. There can be the Dr. Barbaro spoke of the approach in the US, and Massimo Torresi spoke of the regulation in the European Union. Now you have seen the different approaches. Of course, ONU is the one oriented to the rights of the human rights, to the internet that guarantees access to everyone. The question remains open. The digital platforms are places of freedom where everyone can share everything. But the UN asks, what about those who share racist theories or doctrines of hate or criminal activity? Is the freedom of speech and expression in conflict with regulation that limits it? Dr. Barber spoke about this also, the US legislation that is very strong in this sense. And are we certain that a democratic government will act in defense of freedom and sustainable development if it then sells data to companies that direct our tastes because and our ability to vote and choose because they are like because they can be used for the elections to choose the democratic government makes a question to itself in the silence of many of the if, in with the $44 million, they have canceled immediately the Department of Human Rights. The UN wrote a letter, but this department has not yet been established. When we speak of new forms of media like the internet, it is sorry, so you understand that these are the themes, the juridical themes that come, the certain sense implemented and challenged by great big tech companies. What is the UN doing in all this context? Uh, in July of 2018, the Secretary General decided to constitute a panel of digital cooperation. And 2019, he presented a final report the age of digital independence with academics and technocrats, the idea came to have a digital cooperation centered on three principles: connect, respect, and protect. So in 2030, internet access should be available for everyone and should be the patrimony of everyone and not only of some. Respect the human rights is not only can be permitted offline but should also be present online. In the end, protect above all the most vulnerable in the digital world where they can also be hurt, that they could yeah. Then in 2020 September, in the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, the Secretary General released his report on the principles or guideline of directives that could be bring about a common agenda where we propose a global digital compact to be approved at the future summit in 2024 September next year. Where together with the governments, the new and the private sector, they will work on the gender equality, etc. What happens after this call to work for this digital compact? The UN has involved the private sector, the the business tech, the NGOs, the faith-based organization, universities, and individuals, including the youth, to be able to arrive at the ideas and proposals on how this digital compact can be designed. Because we are all working on this right now. In all this, he has nominated a representative for the technological world and beyond. He has taken charge given to Rwanda, and at the end, at the end of March, we were invited. When we say all, it is all to send proposals regarding on how we could have this digital compact, an outline shared principles for open, free, and secure digital future for all. Thousands of proposals arrived. You can see this in the site of the UN, and 6% of these proposals came from the civil societies, and so the work is they are now proposing for the it's not only about developing a digital law, but to create a coalition. So you can go to the visit the site of the ONU to see the proposals, and you can see also the same Amazon with all its department of human rights that is working on this. So the civil society is present in this. So it is necessary to propose this criteria of responsibility to us not to create an internet that is against the person. What I like of this proposal that New Humanities also proposes and encourages to present in the International Office Center that this 6% is very active in this front is that the digital hope is a personal appeal that those who create digital, who use it, who govern it, who invest in it, those who opposed Amazon that did not take care of the environment. Now, those who use the digital are requested or asked to work on it, to be responsible for using it. So the methodology that points to me as a person who is also a technician, who is a user, who is a legislator, who is an investor. Chiara Lubick on the media instruments of unity that inspired my work in the UN spoke of media as instrument of unity, and which technologies belong, serve to unite men. eh, eh, And the digital oath is candidate to gather around itself not only individuals but also foundations, companies, activists, so that an alliance is strengthened or born for an open, secure, and free digital future for all. This is the first step that is very important that I encourage you to continue. And I hope this would involve more people. Unfortunately, I have to leave for Washington. I have to greet you. Luis told me that the debate will be done on the AI. It's really interesting. I hope the next time I could be there. And best wishes for your work.
Grazie Maddalena per aver portato tante conoscenze in queste importanti azioni che sono sviluppando. Il tempo sta per
So thank you, Magdalena. Time is almost over, but we have maybe time for a last question. For those who are still with us, Massimo Torrisi and Sergio Barbaro. So, for your experiences, we have some possibility to create some system of global regulations for the digital services. What do you think about this? Who is going to begin? Please go ahead. I'm very skeptical personally because there are too many interests at stake. This moment, universal regulation on a global level, these terms are very hard to be applied. My opinion is, as we're discussing here, a bottom-up attempt at promoting and making aware people is can certainly produce effects. But if you want to get to an international regulation at the moment, it is very hard. I was very surprised a few days ago by a colleague in a meeting on artificial intelligence. It was a meeting of South Italian comparativists. He spoke about artificial intelligence and he said that when we talk about artificial intelligence, we cannot talk about a product, but we have to talk about a power, a form of power. So we should regulate it as an expression of power. Also power connected to public interest or state interest. Sometimes there's such a strong interest on a level of states in the development of these new technologies that is very hard to get to a global assessment, even if promoted through a bottom-up approach. So welcome attempts of self-regulation in the civil society as the one we are doing, but on a governmental level I see it very hard. Then so there are valid reasons at the European level to work in this field. The European Union is trying to play on an international level using human rights as a vanguard, human rights and drifts of new technologies. And this topic of defense of human rights is become exportable with an excellent form of governance. And in other countries, as the Brazilian professor said, are trying to consider these and see if it can be used in their own context. So this is really, my opinion, a good work, and I say this as a very interesting work. This of dignity, human dignity compared to the use of technology. This has serious consequences on a practical level, and if we talk to enterprises about the protection of human rights, then in some way we will be advantaged in front of US and China, which have big normative limits to these. So there is, in that case, a boomerang effect in those states. So sooner or later there will be problems. But the European Union instead, when it has tools to face this, is able to respond very effectively in comparison to other realities that are not so respectful of human rights. So on this we should try to bring ahead the universal drive, the first essential parameter of human rights, human dignity. This must always be the very first expression for a new digital humanism, as we love to call it. So human rights, human dignity, and we have a lot to say on this, and maybe you can make a dialogue on this. Thank you. So about the global regulation, we know we don't have any global government. So what the UN are doing, as we heard from Maddalena Maltese, we never saw, as we're seeing today, so many initiatives for the digital regulation, in particular due to artificial intelligence, as it is today. So there is a huge proliferation. For example, the Council of Europe, so the one that has its headquarters in Strasbourg, that includes members that are not members of the European Union, is creating a convention, a legal tool of international law, even if we know that enforcement of international law is very hard, that regulates artificial intelligence. Even the ECOSOC is working on this. So it's a huge work that is totally unprecedented. No subject, with exception maybe of peace, of basic human rights, have seen these before. So it is good, this proliferation, but they must be harmonized. The European Union, as lawyer Barber said, is at a very high level in terms of rule of law, so respect for law and democracy and the basic rights, and it is hard to mediate with the different standards, but we must not be snob. So it is important to have a dialogue, and the result is important. The European Union is using also these other tools, including the Council of Europe, in order to try to contaminate in the positive sense all these tools. So what we think is a very high standard, we hope it can pass through in a different way. But I want to be positive on this. It is clear that the digital oath, I agree with what Madre Maltese said. Everything begins with people. So we have to work on the persons. This, the lawyer tells me about the rights of consumers, etc. But the contribution of the person is essential. The person makes the law, the person makes the institution, etc. So it is essential to work on this. Law is necessary. We hope maybe one day it will disappear, but until now it is essential to have this approach that comes from specific people, in fact. So we thank each of you for your attention and the quality of this debate that we just had together.